and it's good to see you.
Yeah, me too, Peter. Um, 1 second. Yeah. So let's begin if you're ready. Um,
Absolutely.
I prepared some questions for you. Some of them I also will be improvised, I think. But I wanted to start it from you, Peter, because I'm really curious something about you. And some of these questions will be pretty stupid and typical, of course. Where you grew up and how you decided to be an author or writer or whatever.
Okay, well, just think of Charlie at the piano.
Yeah.
We're both going to improvise, just like Charlie. You know, can't get started, but we are getting started. So that's we're one up on Charlie, who kept going back to the song "I Can't Get Started." But I got started. I grew up in the Boston area. Um, I write about it some in my new book, "Looking to Get Lost," which
Mm-hmm.
has some of my background, but is mostly about people like Doc Pomus and Merle Haggard and Johnny Cash and Alan Toussaint and people like that. But I was just, when I was about 15 or 16, I just fell into the blues. I mean, a friend of mine and I were exposed to it for the first time. We were both just totally knocked out. It was kind of happenstantial. His brother went to the Newport Folk Festival, came back with a bunch of records. Some of them were blues, and we were just flipped. I mean, both me and my friend Bob Smith. And from there, it was just a total obsession. So I was, let's see, I was 16 in 1960.
All right.
Uh, within and within 5 years, I had started writing about the music for myself. But a couple of years after that, um, 66, 67, this underground press started up in this country. A friend of mine started a magazine called Crawdaddy, which was called the first rock and roll magazine. I think it was in 66. He was a college freshman or sophomore. This is Paul Williams. And he asked me if I'd like to write about it. And I said, sure, but I just want to write about the blues because that was my total, obsession. And he said, well, that's fine. I mean, the magazine was about the Jefferson Airplane, Moby Grape, Grateful Dead. I mean, it was sort of about San Francisco acid rock. And, but if he didn't mind, I didn't mind. So I wrote about Skip James. I wrote about Robert Pete Williams. I wrote about Buddy Guy in Crawdaddy. And then in Boston, an underground weekly started up called Boston After Dark. I started writing for them, and the only reason, I mean, I always wanted to be a writer. I was writing novels then. I've written 10 novels, of which only one has been published. But I saw myself as a fiction writer. But the only reason I wrote about the music was because I just couldn't turn down the chance to tell people about this music I thought was so great. So I was writing about Howlin' Wolf, Muddy Waters, Bo Diddley, Chuck Berry, Jerry Lee Lewis, and eventually Charlie Rich. I mean, not too long, Charlie Rich. And it was just to tell people how great this music was.
It's a great story, really. So you was you blues fan, am I right?
No, I'd say more like a blues fanatic.
Okay.
Blues nut. But that was what led me. I mean, it was blues that led me to everything else I've ever loved, and including country music, gospel music, rhythm and blues, soul. But it was blues that was the direct link to everything.
Do you have some? I understand that this is probably a little bit stupid question, but
Uh,
do you have some?
but
Okay, do you have some favorite musicians from that time, like maybe Howlin' Wolf or, as you say, Buddy Guy, someone? Just
well, let's say in the at the front and all through this book, Looking to Get Lost, which came out this past fall. I talk about Jerry Lee Lewis. Always talked about his trilogy of heroes. I mean, Jimmy Rogers, Hank Williams, Al Jolson, and he said he was the fourth on Mount Rushmore. The
mm,
place where the mountain where all the presidents are. Well, for me, it's always been Howlin' Wolf, Jerry Lee Lewis, Solomon Burke, um, and James Brown, the James Brown Show, I guess, but not.
excuse me, James Brown. Did you just?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
okay, okay. Mhm.
But I mean, it really hasn't changed that. I mean, all of the people that I've loved from the beginning, I continue to love today. Muddy Waters, just all of the Skip James, but Merle Haggard. But I think those are the four greatest live performers I've ever seen perform live.
Hmm.
Solomon, Howlin' Wolf, Jerry Lee Lewis, and James Brown. Now, I didn't see a lot of other people. I never saw Sam Cooke play live, and if I had, I probably would have him up there. But those. But I've added on. I mean, I continued. You know, it's like a guy. I was listening the other day to a guy named Greg Trooper, whom Dan Penn produced a few years ago, and I don't know that much about his music, but I just think it's really beautiful. And you know, I listen to the Alabama Shakes. I mean, I think they're terrific. Or you know, there's a whole variety. Chris Stapleton, somebody I first, you know, he's a big country singer now. The first time I saw him was in Nashville. I was teaching at Vanderbilt I did that for 12 years, living there 3 or 4 months a year in Nashville. And I used to go down to this place called the Station Inn, which was mainly bluegrass, because it was great live music. It wasn't that bluegrass was my focus or anything. And I see this guy, this great big guy, singing with a bluegrass group, and I had no idea who he was. I don't think he had any hit records at that time. And I found out later it was Chris Stapleton, who's now like a top, you know, hit singer in country. But I just thought, man, this is like Otis Redding singing with a bluegrass band. And that knocked me out. So, you know, you try to be open. I mean, maybe you're not as open as you should be, but you try to be open to all kinds of things.
As Charlie Rich said, I love all kinds of music. Yeah.
Yeah. No. I mean, he wasn't going to make any discriminations. There were no categories for Charlie. And in fact, there are no categories for any of the people I've written about.
So the next question. Okay, let's talk about Charlie Rich a little bit. How did you meet Charlie Rich, and how you and Charlie become friends?
We'd have to ask Charlie how we became friends, you know, or Margaret Ann. You know how we became friends? Through Margaret Ann, because she was so outgoing and so charming and so talented and so brilliant. And, you know, no matter how little Charlie wanted to talk to anybody, Margaret Ann, when we first met, just was not going to let anybody walk away from her husband, from Charlie Rich, without recognizing not just his genius, but also what a great guy he was. But I met Charlie and Margaret Ann. I was working on my first book, Feel Like Going Home, which came out in '71. So here we are 50 years later. And it's just as much fun as ever. And, you know, Sam Phillips said, you know, if it's not fun, it's not worth doing. And I think everybody should keep that in mind. But I went out to see Charlie perform at a club called the Vapors, which was out by the Memphis airport. And he did something. I think he did 6 sets a night. It started at around 4 o'clock in the afternoon with a tea dance, you know, drinking tea. Sort of tea. It wasn't really tea. But, and he and Ace Cannon and Narvel Feltz were all billed. So each of them did, as I recall, maybe this isn't possible, but each of them did 6 sets. So they had 18 sets between them, and it probably went till midnight. Now, maybe that's not true. Maybe they all did 4 sets apiece. But and I would talk to Charlie in between his sets, and Margaret Ann was there. And when Charlie was singing, Margaret Ann would give her version of the story. And both of them told this really beautiful, eloquent story about how dedicated he was to the music, how much the music meant to both of them. And these were the 2 kids at Forest City High School, the only 2 kids who read Downbeat magazine about jazz, which was their first love. And they shared a subscription. I mean, they must have met when I think they met when they were around 15. You probably know. I remember Charlie was on a horse.
Charlie and Margaret meet when...
it doesn't matter.
17 and 18.
They met in high school.
Yeah, in Forest City.
They shared a subscription to Downbeat magazine. Anyway, I met them that night at the Vapors in 1970. And I've just never met 2 people whom I liked more on first, you know, acquaintance than the 2 of them. And Charlie told me about the story of his life, about his, you know, his drinking, the guilt he felt about singing the music that he sang, his agoraphobia, which is fear of crowds. And he said, you know, pretty funny for an entertainer but I just don't enjoy performing for people. And so he told me that, and Margaret Ann told the same story, only maybe with a little more panache is the word, with a little more flash or something. And but then I went back and I wrote the chapter about Charlie and Feel Like Going Home. And I just thought, this is terrible. Here are these two people. I just was so knocked out by them. I just really loved them both. And now here I've got to write this chapter, which is kind of a down chapter about, because I've got to tell the truth. It's what Charlie and Margaret Ann told me about how difficult life had been for him and how he had contended with so many problems and difficulties. And I just thought, this is terrible. I've got to write the truth, but I'll never see them again. And when the book came out, I just remember getting a call from the publisher that Charlie had just called up the publisher and ordered 30 copies because he wanted to give copies to everyone in his family. And right after that, I heard from Charlie, and he said, man, it really hurts to read some of that, but it's the truth, and that's what's important. And we were friends from then on.
Yeah, it's fabulous story, about friendship. And what type of person was Charlie Rich? I mean, as just a human, as man, how do you think?
I'd say he was a very introspective person. He looked inside himself. He was a man of very few words. He hated the telephone. He hated to use the telephone. I would say he was on the gloomy side. He says, he said to me one time, he says, I don't know, man, I just don't dig happy songs. And he did not dig happy songs. They could be lonely songs, they could be melancholy songs, they could be songs with deep feeling. But and he was the kind of person who didn't show his emotions that easily, which Margaret Ann did. And in that sense, they were a good, not contrast, they were a good combination. But I mean, I remember one time, this was 3 years after we had first met, and Charlie had gone out on a promo tour for Behind Closed Doors and had no idea that it was going to be a hit. And he was playing this little club in New York called Max's Kansas City, which was more of a hippie club than it was it wasn't a country club at all, although Waylon Jennings had played there recently. And I went to see him. He invited me to come down to New York, and I came down. Mm-hmm. He says, I got a little surprise for you tonight. He had a trio of musicians from Arkansas, John Vanderpool, the guitarist, and who just passed. Very nice guy.
Yeah. I know what you're talking about. His name. I just saw it just a couple weeks ago on Facebook and just forgot his name. Mainfield.
Yeah, David.
Yeah.
And I forget who the third, but it was just a little trio from Arkansas. David was about 16, 17 at the time, I think. And Charlie said to me, he says, I got a surprise for you tonight, man. This is at Max's Kansas City in 73. Mm-hmm. And I said, great, because I like to pretend I like surprises. I'm not too crazy about surprises, but I pretend. And anyway, so the surprise was as much a surprise to the musicians as it was to me. And it was the song Feel Like Going Home, which he told me right then. He said, I wrote this song, from the inspiration, from the feeling of your book. Not because Charlie said, it's not because I'm in the book. It's been the feeling that I got from the book. And he played it. And the musicians had a hard time playing behind him because they'd never heard it before. And it was just one of the most thrilling things that, and that was the kind of thing where Charlie, there was such great depths of feeling in Charlie, but not easily expressed. And I'll tell you one other story about what was Charlie like. I spent about 6 years pitching, trying to sell the album that became Pictures and Paintings, Charlie's last album. And I did it because I thought, he had been carrying around this valise full of songs that he had never recorded. And I had also been to a couple of his rehearsal sessions out at the house. And so I put together a demo tape from some of the rehearsals, songs from the rehearsal sessions, a live version of You Don't Know Me that I had never heard him do before, that he sang at Memphis State, that was just absolutely beautiful. And that was always my concept of the album, that it would be called You Don't Know Me. And then Doc Pomus gave us Pictures and Paintings, and that became the title song. But anyway, so finally a friend of mine named Joe McEwen got in the position where he could, sign up the album. He was at Warner Brothers, he was at Sire Records, and he'd had a lot of success at Sire with various rock acts, including Madonna. And so he had a budget for a one album deal with Charlie. So Joe and I went down to meet with Charlie, and we sat at the kitchen table. Joe doesn't talk much either. Joe doesn't talk hardly at all. And neither one of them said a word. I mean, I'm trying to say, well, I think what Charlie's trying to say is this, and I'm saying I think what Joe is trying to say. And afterwards, they both called me up and they say, "How did it go?" And I said to Joe, "Man, I've never seen Charlie so enthusiastic." And it was true, but you could. And then Charlie says, "Well, that's the album." Charlie says, "Well, so how do you think it went?" I said, "Man, I told them both. I've never seen Joe." Charlie asked me, "How did Joe?" And I said, "I've never seen Joe so enthusiastic." But neither one of them could have told, because neither one of them, both of them, spoke hardly at all. So, but that was what Charlie was like, and also what Joe was like.
I really want to say thank you, Peter, for this album, because I really think that this is a true masterpiece. Not because I'm Charlie Rich fan, of course, but it's really one of the greatest album in my opinion, because some of the songs like Mood Indigo, Jazz Standard, he did it just awesome. I never heard something like this. I mean, about this version. Of course, You Don't Know Me, songs like Somebody Broke Into My Heart, and Pictures and Paintings. It's I always was curious if this song Pictures and Paintings was written especially for Charlie by Doc Pomus and Dr. John. No,
Doc was dying actually at the time that he wrote it, or that he finished it.
It was, excuse me, I'm sorry. It was one of his last songs. I mean, about Doc Pomus.
It was one of his last songs, and there was just very bare bones demo by Dr. John, by Mac. But it wasn't written for Charlie, but it sounded so much. I had brought Scott Billington, a wonderful producer, a great friend, who worked for Rounder for many years, and I had brought him in to produce the session. And I think he's the one who got the demo. I think, and then he played it for me, and we both agreed that it sounded perfect for Charlie. But we hadn't been able to get Charlie. There was a song by Mickey Newbury called "You've Always Had the Blues," and as long as I knew Charlie, he kept saying, "I'm going to record that song." And Bobby Bland had recorded it, and he said, "I really want to record You've Always Got the Blues." So we put a tape together of a few songs, a very few songs that we thought would be good for the session, besides Charlie's originals. And he listened to You've Always Had the Blues, and he says, "No, I don't want to do that." And I'm saying, "Wait a minute, Charlie. For years, you said how much you wanted to do it," but he didn't. I don't know why. I mean, I can't explain it. But he heard this Pictures and Paintings, and you had to hear behind what was on the demo because there was so little on the demo. But he heard it, and he responded to that immediately. And it wasn't easy to record. The whole session was difficult because Charlie just found it difficult just to come into the studio. It was kind of like an outgrowth of this. He said to me at the time, the thing I'd really like to do would be to play the piano in the lobby of the Hotel Peabody. And they always have a piano player there playing different standards. He says, and I could just sit there all night. Nobody would know who I was. And I could just play. They've got a beautiful piano. And that would be the perfect, my perfect vision of entertainment. But he had a hard time just dealing with Sam Phillips said that his nerves were all on the outside, and I think that's a good description. and that was the way it was. And so with pictures and paintings, it looked like we weren't going to be able to get it. And Scott he, recorded a take, an instrumental take. I think Scott may have done the guide vocal, and the guitarist Michael Tolles found a figure. You can hear the figure on the song. And when Charlie heard that, that finally put him over the edge. He wanted to do the song, but he couldn't hear it. And so he recorded, I think he recorded his voice and piano. And I mean, even the first take, I don't know if the first take was the one that was used, but he was totally into it. And I think he recorded a good deal more piano, as I recall. And then Scott just edited the piano in and out. But the rest of the stuff, like Mood Indigo, was just, or Every Time You Touch Me, I Get High, which was maybe the most spontaneous song of the session. And I was totally against. I just said, you don't want to do that, because I never liked the song when he did it with Billy Sherrill. But he was just completely into the song. And I think it's really, in some ways, one of the most successful songs on the it's just from start to finish, it just has that light feeling. But Mood Indigo, the way he stretches out Mood Indigo, it was so great. And he just loved the song so much. And then the originals, I think he really carried off beautifully.
Wow, it's an amazing story. And by the way, I forgot to ask, am I right that the session was in summer of 1991?
It was both in the summer and then, this is terrible. I've been looking this up lately. Yeah, I couldn't be there in the summer. I thought it was 92. Am I wrong?
The album was released in April 1992, so
okay,
it's probably
right. No, you're right. Then it was in the summer of '91. I couldn't be there because I was running a summer camp for kids in the summer, and I would call in to Scott, and then they probably would have finished it in the summer, except Charlie broke his foot. There were just many problems, and so we picked it up again in the fall. Maybe it was in December, but that's when most of
this picture was taken in December.
Yeah. And David Gard, a wonderful guy, wonderful photographer, came down to take the picture, and the idea was to have an album presented somewhat like the Blue Note albums, and he took Charlie's hand or hands, I can't remember.
Hands.
Yeah. And that was the way the Dan Penn album, which Joe did as the second in this series of independent albums, and that's a terrific album. So Joe McEwen had David Gard come in for that in Muscle Shoals. Alexandra and I were both, and my wife Alexandra and I were both there, and David took some beautiful pictures. But Dan didn't like that Blue Note concept. For Charlie, that was natural. But Dan wanted a picture of himself with standing on Two Steps of the Blues, which was his favorite album by Bobby Blue Bland. So he had somebody else take the picture. But the whole thing about Charlie was, the idea was to present him in a Charlie Rich context, not as a country, absolutely not as a country singer, but not as any singer, as a Charlie Rich kind of a singer. And we set up 3 showcase bookings in 3 jazz clubs, one in LA, one in New York, one in Boston. And Charlie didn't make any of the dates. It was just, he was a very shy person. Nobody held it against him, but he just had a hard time with that kind of thing. And in the end, I think the only show he did was one you're very familiar with. It was Ralph Emery.
Yeah, that's for now.
Yeah, and he felt comfortable. And Ralph Emery did a great job. And Charlie felt comfortable in that context. And I thought he did. I believe he did pictures and paintings.
Since I Fell for You, Feel Like Going Home, and also from little fragments from You Don't Know Me and Mood Indigo. I wish he could play more music there at the show, but.
Well, yeah. But it was wonderful that he did that, and it was like the show that I went to in Memphis. I can't remember. I was spending time with Charlie. We weren't doing anything in particular. It was after Pictures and Paintings, I think. But George Klein set up a show for him to do a show for the Russian Ballet Company, which was in Memphis, and they were
Excuse me, George Klein. It's Elvis's
yeah,
friend.
yeah, Memphis DJ and good friend of Elvis's, and so the Russian Ballet Company. I don't remember which Russian ballet company it was, but they were touring this country and playing in Memphis, and they were given the choice of going to see the Memphis Symphony or Charlie Rich. Well, they chose Charlie Rich, and George set it up. It was like at an embassy hotel. I mean, I don't mean embassy like a foreign embassy. You know, there's a chain of hotels called the embassy, like the Hilton hotels, and Charlie played with this jazz trio with Fred Ford on sax and the player who who was on WDIA for a long time. It was an all-black trio, and Charlie, and when he sang "You Don't Know Me," the Russians, your compatriots, my compatriots that are just
Yeah.
stood up and they went bravo, bravo. You know, really great. It was like this fantastic moment, and that's what it. You know, that's what you felt like. That's what Charlie's music could bring out of people. It was hard to bring it out of Charlie.
It's just incredible story, really. So, as an executive producer of pictures and paintings, did you have your own vision on this project? Maybe some of these ideas was released or some not.
No. I just brought the. I mean, essentially, what I did was bring the whole thing together. I pitched the concept. I made a demo, a cassette demo, which was largely reproduced on, with the album. But it wasn't that those were the only songs that, when he ended up doing Every Time You Touch Me, I Get High, that just added to the thing. So I didn't have, and then and so I brought all the various people together, but I didn't have,
Okay, I get it. So,
but I'll tell you something. To me, I've been in the studio a fair number of times. I'm not, and I'm just not a producer. I mean, I've produced a couple of albums, but that's not what I want to do. It's not what I'm, but the night I think that he overdubbed, his vocal and piano on Pictures and Paintings, but mainly he did like 4 or 5 songs, just 1, 2, 3, 4, this boom in a row, and got them every time. And I've never felt so emotional. I mean, I just wanted to cry. I may have cried, but I was just, it was so overwhelming because it had been so hard to get there. And then all of a sudden it was just like he was there. And when you talk about that kind of thing, I mean, for somebody like Charlie, for somebody like, I'll say for somebody like Merle Haggard or someone like Howlin' Wolf, there's no such thing as a throwaway take. I mean, I'm not saying he didn't do a lot of his commercial music. He did as a performance. I mean, he did it, and he did a good job at it, but he didn't put his heart and soul into it. But for the music that Charlie cared about, everything was everything. I mean, he was putting everything into everything. And so when he got just, after all the difficulties, the problems of getting to that point when just he got all of these songs one after another and put so much into it, it just killed me. I mean, it was just such an emotional moment.
Yeah. I wish I could be there because I know that he was a really shy guy, and I don't know why. I've listened to his interviews with Terry Gross when he told the story about his childhood, about when the time when he was a children, and but
when nothing came out.
It was a shell shocked, as he said, or something like that. So he was one of the most. I'm not sure. I don't even know how to explain this in English because he was so emotionally and so truly like he just sit at the piano, play and sing, and it's so natural, so just amazing. Because when I bought Smithsonian interview 1992, which held at his house in his home studio. in August, and he played there some of the songs just to show. You Don't Know Me, couple songs which one song which played by C.J. Allen, who taught him to play the piano. Juice Head Baby, and he did it. You Don't Know Me as Eddie Arndt, something like an original. And when I watched this, I thought that I wish that Charlie had more records, more than just Pictures and Paintings, because Pictures and Paintings, it's a fantastic album, but he did it so many records as far as I know at his home studio, and from the time from 1992 until he passed away in 1995. So it's a little bit sad that some of the songs still unpublished. But anyway,
no. But one thing though, and I think you know this, is that what we're trying to do, and I've gotten together with Charlie's son Alan, who performs as Charlie Rich Jr., whom I've known since he was a kid, since when he was out on the road with Charlie and knew him. And for years, all these years since we did Pictures and Paintings, I've been pitching the idea of doing an album from the sessions, from the home sessions. I've got some amazing songs. I've heard. I mean, Alan has all of them, and Charlie's road manager, friend, manager, kind of Al Holcomb, recorded all these sessions. And I talked to Al about it. I talked to Al's son. But what we're really hoping, I'm really hoping that once the travel restrictions because of COVID, now that they're finally going down, Alan and I are hoping to get together with a guy named Steve Weiss at the University of North Carolina and go through the tapes and put out what I conceive of as, you'd call it work in progress or something. Because, they're all, I mean, there are some songs which are just improvised on the moment. And, they may have been elevated by certain substances or, because they're not psychedelic. They're pretty stream of consciousness, though. And, but there's one song that's just such an extraordinary song. And it was funny. This was one of the misunderstandings of the session. It was sort of my fault. But I had put that song on the demo tape. And when we got into the studio, Scott loved the song. I mean, I loved the song. And wrote out all the changes. So that Charlie said, "Oh, I don't remember that," which he wouldn't remember it because it was just improvised. And so Scott wrote out all the changes. And there was just no way. I mean, it was a disaster. And there's no way, it wasn't made for that kind of translation. It was made for the moment that it was made in. And so that didn't go anywhere. And that you said, was there anything I would have changed? I just would have saved Scott a lot of time on that one particular thing. But otherwise, Scott is a great producer. He's produced Irma Thomas. He's produced Johnny Adams. He's done wonderful productions of Zydeco music, and he's very sensitive to the artist always. And I think he's produced Solomon Brick, but I think this was his masterpiece, the Charlie Rich album, Scott Billington as the producer.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask also about these demo tapes which you sent in the 80s. Am I right? It was in the 80s. Did you remember the titles of some of the songs? Because let me explain. I found on your web archive just names like "Cry Like a Man," I think it's "Somebody Broke Into My Heart," "Summertime," "Cindy," songs like that. Maybe did you remember which type?
There were a lot of standards, like "I Can't Get Started." He probably did "I Can't Get Started" 3 times a night, and there were many standards, Gershwin type of standards, jazz standards. There was a song, the improvised song was called "Back Home in Memphis." "Cry Like a Man" was a Dan Penn song, which Charlie liked, when Scott found it. And Charlie liked it when Scott played it for him initially. But and then he hated the song in the studio, and he kept recording. I mean, Scott really wanted him to record. And recorded, and he and even after we had left Memphis, he had Charlie go back into the studio, and Roland James recorded him, and it got worse every time because Charlie just didn't hear the song the way he had the first time. It just wasn't. It didn't ring true for him. So the last the last take he did of "Cry Like a Man," which Roland had recorded. Roland was just one of the most wonderful guys in the world. He's the guy who played guitar on all of Jerry Lee Lewis's hits. And I would talk to Roland. Roland was good friends with everybody. And I would talk to Roland, and he would just shake his head on the phone. But the last version he did, Joe called me up. He says, "I think we finally got it." And then I heard it. I said, "Joe, that's the worst one yet." I mean, Charlie's heart was not in it, and if his heart wasn't in it, it didn't mean anything. So that wasn't one of them. But Back Home in Memphis, and there was something of Liberated Woman, which I don't know that was on the tape. That might have aged a little bit in terms of it was politically well, but I don't know if it was. And there was another thing that sort of morphed into Back Home in Memphis, but you may, in the listing, the two may have run together. But mainly it was something like Summertime. I didn't remember that was on the tapes. I didn't put it on my demo tape, but it wouldn't surprise me if that was one of the songs on the session tapes. And that was the kind of thing he did. And he would
My Funny Valentine also.
Yeah.
I had a chat on Facebook with Jim Newcomb, which rock and roll columnist, and as I told you before, he visited Charlie in 1994 in January or February, it doesn't matter. And he told me that Al Holcomb showed him a couple songs, which was one of these songs was My Funny Valentine and Back to Memphis. He said, "I'm not sure if it's Back to Memphis or Back to Tennessee. I don't remember, but
I'll tell you, I think it was Back Home in Memphis, as I recall it, but it went to Australia, and why it went to Australia, I don't know. But it was just it is a wonderful song, and
I hope I will hear these songs someday. So Jim told me that this was one of the new songs, Charlie, because Charlie told him that this song was written about couple weeks ago at that time, and I had stupid question. I asked, "Did you remember?" What was the type of
right?
What was the type of this song? It was slowly or not slowly? And he said, "Oh, of course I don't remember, but I think it started slowly." I say, "Okay, thank you," because it's crazy to ask some of these questions. Did you remember this song which you heard 25 or for example years ago? So
right.
But I ask. I've got some questions from our Facebook audience, and some of these questions it's similar, and we just talk about I think some of these things, but let's start.
Well, we could try a few, and then maybe wind it up. But
so the first question, and it's from Patrick, from our friend Patrick, which you've seen on the video, and
yeah.
he wrote me, "I live an encyclopedia of American music. I love his books, especially the stories with Charlie and Sleepy LaBeef. Please tell him I'm a big fan of his work." And he asked you about, does he know something about them, about the unpublished records? And the similar question from Jonas Wikström, excuse me if I didn't correct, if there's any unreleased material from his last album. So this couple questions about unreleased tapes. Do you know something about them? I mean,
I tell you, a Cry Like a Man. Well, I mean, there's obviously unreleased tapes because there wasn't just one take of every song.
Yeah.
But as far as titles, I may be wrong, but I think Cry Like a Man is my only memory of and it really would make Charlie very unhappy to release it, because he just, after liking the song, the problem with the song, and it's a terrific song by a great songwriter, by Dan Penn, but it was written from a woman's point of view. And I said to Charlie, this is about as active as my role as producer would ever get. I said, well, it isn't that difficult. You can do a monologue at the front, the way he did on a number of his songs, and you can turn it around that way. And but I didn't persuade him. I mean, it wasn't like an article of faith for me. I didn't have to persuade him. It was just I was trying to get him to see what he had first heard in the song, and he never did. So that's the only song that I know of as being left out of the album, and it should have been left out because it just would have made Charlie miserable, and it wasn't a good representation of him. It just wasn't the right song for him, even though it's a great song, and somebody else could. And maybe I'm not sure. It wouldn't surprise me if Irma Thomas had recorded it or somebody else that Scott produced had recorded it.
All right, thanks. So the next question, couple questions from David Bates. He asked, it's a quote. I would like to know what Peter's funniest memories he has of Charlie. I think there's been a lot, but maybe you can share with us with some story.
Well, I wouldn't say funniest. Charlie was not a comedian.
Indeed, yeah.
I think we shared a kind of sensibility. I think that I'm not the most optimistic person in the world. I mean, I'm passionate about what I do, and I try to be positive about everything I do. But I don't see, I don't see a great day coming, really. But Charlie, no, I mean, after Charlie had finished the album and we were all back home, and Scott sent us, I think cassettes that were not, where they hadn't been mixed yet. They didn't represent the final mixes, but he sent out cassettes to me and Charlie and I'm sure a number of other people. And one day the phone rings and it was Charlie, and he hated the telephone. I mean, he would have anyone, I'm not sure why, I just, there are people, I mean, Sleepy hated the telephone too, but I'm not sure it was for the same reason. Sleepy was just a great big entertainer with, gusto and everything. And that wasn't Charlie either. But, so it's Charlie calling. And he says, you'll never guess what I've been doing, man. And I said, no, I won't. I don't know what you're doing.
What it was.
He says, I've been driving around in my 190 SL, it's Mercedes. I said, well, great. That's great. I mean, I wasn't all cool, but I mean, I'm just thinking, what is this about? He says, and you'll never guess what I've been listening to. And at this point, I was beginning to catch on. I said, no, what? He says, I've been listening to our album, man. And wow. I've been listening to it, and I've listened to it over and over, and it's really great. I mean, and so to me, that was just the pinnacle. I didn't care if the album sold a single copy. It had made Charlie happy. It had made him feel, fulfilled, and that was the purpose of it. And for him to call up and to talk about driving around and listening to it over and over. I thought that's it,
Great story.
That's the pinnacle of life.
As he said in this interview, in Smithsonian interview, he said that Pictures and Paintings, it's kind of a work of love, something like that.
Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah. I see that he really enjoyed this album, and it's just again, thank you so much, Peter, for this. Thank you, because I know that I understand that it probably was very, very hard to work with Charlie. I mean, this demo tapes, studios, and all
no, it was thrilling to do. I mean, I just wouldn't. A lot of things take a long time, and this took 6 years. But so what? I mean, it was something I believed in. Just like if we get to do the album from the session tapes, the rehearsal tapes, that will have taken 30 years. But so what? It's just, I mean, it's not like
the next question, also from David Bates, he asked, what songs of Charlie was your favorite, and what he was Uh, and what was he like to be around?
I think we've covered he was like to be around. I think that's said about. I mean, not that you could ever cover it. I mean, he was a very deep person, but I think we've given enough.
Yeah.
Um, and no, I don't know. There were so many songs of Charlie's that I loved. I remember he played me "Milky White Way" from the gospel album right after he recorded it, and I thought that was an amazing performance. The album "Pictures and Paintings," uh, in general, "You Don't Know Me" was a song that I didn't hear until about 1982. I didn't hear him do it until then, or 81, I guess, when he did the performance at Memphis State when he got the
It was
Memphis Group.
82, or I'm not sure. Okay, 82 or 80 or 81.
He was given the award by the Memphis Music Award at Memphis State University, and
No, but
I came
it was 82, 82.
82. Okay, and I came down for it, and that's where he played Pictures and Paintings. I mean,
Yeah,
without
you don't know me. You don't know
you
me.
know, and so that was, and then Margaret Ann's "Life's Little Ups and Downs" is such a beautiful song, such a beautifully constructed song. But there were so many songs. Alan had a song, I think, that he co-wrote with Margaret Ann when he was about
A
seven.
piece, a part of my life. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Great
So
song, really.
yeah. So it all, I mean, to me, it's not like picking out. It's not picking out one song. It's the experience of Charlie Rich, and you can get into a mood, and you can make up a mixtape for yourself, or put together a selection.
It's always. I personally don't like questions like "What's your favorite musician?" or "Favorite movie?" "Favorite book?" "Favorite song?" because it's so hard to say sometimes because you can love. Because I love like Chet Baker, Charlie
Mhm.
Rich, Elvis, the Beatles. I grew up on the Beatles. A Hard Day's Night. It was the first album which I've heard when I was about 6 or 7. It was on old Soviet vinyl, by the way. So it's really strange questions because
Oh yeah,
sometimes you like jazz to play jazz, sometimes blues, sometimes the gospel or pop or country pop and whatever. So, and the final question from Facebook from Mr. Paul DeVille. I think that probably I might know the answer on this question, but correct me if I'm wrong. He asked who was Charlie's favorite musician or musician, and as far as I know, he loved so much Ray Charles and
it,
Bobby Blue Bland, and I think he loved Oscar Peterson, jazz pianist. But am I right?
yeah. No. He also loved Stan Kenton.
Oh,
Don't
sure.
forget
I forgot
he was
Stan Kenton.
Charlie
Yeah.
Kenton in high school, and there were other. I'm trying to think who I kept thinking that Oscar Peterson he admired the hell out of, but there was another pianist, a less sort of demonstrative pianist, or less not Ahmad Jamal, but there was another piano player who it struck me I'll bet he loved Miles Davis too, particularly
Hmm.
kind of cool Miles Davis. So there were a ton of, but you're right. What you said, Ray Charles, that for him was sort of the coming together of all these strands, and they had a lot in common. Um, except Ray Charles was a much more outgoing person, was much more suited to
Mhm.
stardom, I think.
I've read somewhere that someone that it about duet with Charlie Rich and Ray Charles, and some of the producers said that it's crazy because Charlie didn't play piano at the sessions in seventies in the 70s. However, and and as I remember, Charlie in this Smithsonian interview, he showed that he, as he said, stole some licks from Mr. Ray Charles, like in "You Don't Know Me" when he played "You Just Say Hello" and "I Can Hardly Speak," ta da dan, and this ta da dan, it's Ray Charles piano lick, and
No,
it's
no, he
it's
was no. I
great.
mean, he modeled. I mean, and to say he didn't play piano is like saying Miles Davis didn't play trumpet.
Yeah.
So
Just a couple last questions. This is a little bit strange question maybe, but if I ask you to describe Charlie Rich as the man and musician, and you can use only three words, uh, what the words it would be? Let's imagine that we have a book and there's a written Charlie Rich, Peter Guralnick, and you will open the book and there's a blank page, and on the top only three words, only three. Which words? If you,
Thoughtful, deep, sensitive. I mean, they're not the best words in the world, but
right.
all of them apply to Charlie.
And can you say the same question about Margaret Ann, if it's not hard for you?
Margaret Ann was outgoing. She was as sensitive as Charlie, but she had a manner to cover it, and she was just both charming and intellectual.
Thanks. It's great. And did you remember the last time when you meet Charlie or see Charlie?
I don't know if I saw him after. I feel like I must have, but I don't know if I saw him after the pictures and painting sessions. I'm sure I did, but I can't remember when it was. Yeah.
All right. So
I have to say one thing. When you talked about Ray Charles. I think Charlie's greatest ambition would have been to make an album with Ray Charles. I mean, he just was so taken with Ray Charles, and and I think that would have been, with all the duets that Ray Charles did. I think doing a full album, it would be like one of those Chet Atkins, albums, and you've listened to a lot of them, where he would do an album with another guitarist, and I think it could have been all instrumental. Charlie and Ray Charles, but that he spoke of that from the day that I first met him. I mean, it was a fantasy on his part. He didn't think it would ever happen, and it never did. But it could have, by the time he had achieved the stardom that he did in the '70s. It's something that if a more imaginative record producer could have brought about, and it could have been just a great, great session.
okay. Well, Peter, thanks so much for this conversation, because it's really amazing. It's cool, and I don't know so many English words to explain what I mean. It's shameful. It's shameful for me, but for those let's say for people who don't know that, let me show something that. If you take this booklet from Pictures and Paintings album, and you turn around, and you'll see here down the Peter Guralnick, January 1992. My camera don't focus, and this really amazing album, and it's a little bit sad to read the final words. In this, am I right that this called line? I call it booklet, but this is liner note, yeah.
Yeah, either one.
Liner note, and you wrote that that the next time you hear Charlie, there will be something altogether different, and it didn't happen. It's a little bit, not a little bit. It's really sad, because he passed away. He was only 62, right. And I think he was one of the greatest musicians and one of the most talented musicians which I ever seen. I've seen many different musicians, and of course I like almost all of them, but Charlie was something really special, and I hope that someday we will hear these demo tapes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm sure that it's a true masterpiece. Okay, not because I'm Charlie Rich fan, just because I understand that he was so much talented guy. He also played the saxophone in the 50s, and he was. I really like his style of piano. He played some. He had some strange style, not like. Like I would say, this is the true bluesy piano, what he did, and I really enjoyed it so much, and I can listen to this thing again and again and again and again. So, so thanks so much for this conversation, for this album, for this opportunity to talk about Charlie and yeah.
You know, you asked me to characterize Charlie, and you know, I think that, and probably everybody who watches this or everybody who listens to this will know this already, but Sam Phillips, you know, the discoverer of Howlin' Wolf, B.B. King, Ike Turner, Elvis Presley, Jerry Lee
All
Lewis,
of them, yeah.
all of them, said of all the artists that he recorded, the two most profound and the two that he would, you know, go to the grave wishing he could have continued to record them until, you know, both of them were done. The two artists that he admired the most were Howlin' Wolf and Charlie Rich. The two artists had the greatest depth of feeling. Now, these are two entirely different musicians, but different kinds of musicians, and the way they present themselves is entirely different. But from Sam Phillips' point of view, there was nobody he recorded, including Elvis, Jerry Lee Lewis, and he had superlative words about all of them. But it was Charlie and Howlin' Wolf who reached the greatest, you know, heights or depths of profundity, and who had the most to say and who communicated the most emotion.
Yeah, from in the interview with Terry Gross, and she said that she asked Sam Phillips to choose all from all of his songs that he was produced, choose one song, the most favorite, and he chose "Don't Put No Headstone on My Grave," and he described it as masterpiece, and I think that's it's pretty valuable thing from Sam Phillips. If Sam Phillips said that "Don't Put No Headstone on My Grave," it's a masterpiece. It's
well, and let's not forget. I didn't mention this, but who will the next fool be? I mean,
oh sure, yeah,
that is. I mean, that again. And you listen to Charlie sing it, and you listen to Bobby Blue Bland sing it, and and sometimes you listen to Jerry Lee Lewis sing it, and you know, it's a song that should be a standard for all ages. But I think one other question that I had forgotten this. You asked who Charlie admired, and you know, we mentioned all the, you know, the usual people you would think of, or not everybody would think of, but we would think of. But another person he admired, and this really surprised me, was Jerry Lee Lewis. And when he first said that to me, I mean, I thought these guys are opposites. These guys, you know, they have completely different styles, and I always thought, but he genuinely meant it. He spoke to me, and I'm sure he spoke to others, just about the impact of that Jerry Lee would put into his performance. And the funny thing is, I don't know anybody that Jerry Lee admired more than Charlie. So it was a very strange. I don't think anybody would put them together, you know, without the testimony that each of them gave. I mean, it's not a natural combination. Yet each of them, in some way, I think, each of them admired and to some extent envied the qualities that the other one had. You know, Jerry Lee being so extroverted and, you know, just such a natural entertainer, and Charlie. Yeah, but in any case, you know, that really surprised me, and yet I think he was altogether sincere when he said that.
okay. Thanks. By the way, Charlie played the piano on the earliest Jerry Lewis.
And some of
some of the songs, yeah, just a couple.
That he had written, yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much. Of course, I have many. I can ask you thousands and millions of questions about Elvis, Sam Phillips, about Sam Cooke, because I love all of these guys, and I love rock and roll music, I love jazz, blues, and American music. It's as Clint Eastwood in his movie about blues. He said, I probably might be not correct, but he said that I think that the jazz and blues is the only original American art, something like that.
You might have added gospel too.
Of course, gospel, but it was movie about blues, so that's why he did mention about gospel. But anyway, so thanks so much, really, Peter. I'm really enjoyed, and this journey in the back in time and all of these great stories about Charlie, about.
Well, listen, now can I tell Sam Phillips and Jack Clement that we had fun doing this? Because if we didn't have fun, we're gonna have to scrap the whole project. But I
Yeah.
had fun. As long as you had fun, then listen.
Thanks. I just feel uncomfortable because language barrier, and if sometimes you need to think.
But think of me in my Ukrainian persona. One of the things that has tickled me the most is having a Ukrainian edition. Where my grandparents came from, a Ukrainian edition of my book about Sam Phillips, and I sent you the cover of it, I think.
Yeah.
And so I think if everybody doesn't go out and buy the Ukrainian edition, they should at least look at the cover.
Oh, but by the way, I want to show you something that I have. This is something really cool because the first of it's Charlie Rich contract, where is the signature? Yeah. My camera didn't focus, and there is also the cool thing. It's technical writer on this concept with the signature, with his signature.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And it's 1982 in Texas, and also even an original plan of stage.
Right, right.
And I've read it, and there's written that Al Holcomb, his manager, and just I really enjoy these things because I've never met Charlie, and there's because I'm a collector, not because I'm a crazy guy or nuts, just because it's something like connection between you and other world, and it's cool when you can just press the button and buy something really special to you, because I'm not able to buy this thing in this shop. So
That's pretty cool. Yeah.
and this is also rare because it's original contract, and it's 1982,
Right.
July 24, 1982, for two performance in Houston, Texas, and it's rare because he almost didn't play in 80s. I think he played only in his studio.
He did very few concerts at that time. I remember seeing him it was some kind of a cancer benefit or a heart benefit with Red Skelton, the comedian.
Mhm.
And that was. But listen, this has been great. I've really enjoyed it. I think, and I think you have too. Even despite language difficulties, I think your language is great. But
Oh, thank you so much.
But anyway, it's just been a lot of fun because we're both talking about somebody we really care about and whose music has really moved us, and it's been great.
Yeah, and also I think that it's pretty important for people who will be watch this video, and there's not too many information about Charlie, and it's strange that for all these years nobody talked with you about Charlie and pictures and paintings, because it's I don't know why. Maybe of course you talk with someone, but it's not for public, not for YouTube or Facebook and things like that. So thank you so much again, and it was awesome. Just
It was great. It was really great. And thank you, and I hope we make some new friends and fans out there.
yeah,
For sure.
I also hope.